On. Red light is on. Okay. Then you want
Hello, hello, hello,
there.
hello, 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 hello.
Ron.
Hello. Say hello. You can't hear?
It's on. He hasn't turned it on in the control room.
There it is.
Okay. Hello, welcome to the Sudbury Historical Society's May meeting. And our next meeting will be in June 6th. And it's the Cavicchio family story. So that should be good. Before we start the program, Lily Gordon would like to say a few words for the Wayside Inn.
Thank you all. My name is Lily Gordon. I'm a trustee of the Wayside Inn. And on behalf of the trustees, the staff, and Innkeeper John Cowden, I would like to say thank you so much for putting on this program. We really appreciate it. John is very sorry that he's not able to be here today. He is attending a family wedding, but along with his regrets, he has sent some refreshments. So. And I do want to say that those refreshments were made by Steve Pickford. When I said, Steve, these are going to a special program about John Koppeis from the Sudbury Historical Society, he, along with many, many of the folks still at the Wayside Inn who remember Frank, remember him very, very fondly, always refer to him as Mr. K. So, you know, the Wayside Inn and the history of Sudbury are very entwined. In fact, the history of Sudbury and Marlborough and Framingham, so many of these towns are all part of the history of the Wayside Inn. But in addition, you know, thanks to people like, or the words of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and the interest and financing of Henry Ford, we are also a national treasure, the oldest operating inn in the country. And also, I want to say that Mr. Koppeis is part of this wonderful, wonderful legacy that continues today. And so for that reason, we do want to say again, thank you very, very much. Now, I know that many of you know Bob Purrington, who is the innkeeper following Mr. Koppeis. And Bob said to me one day that on the day that Mr. K left, he said, "Do you have any last-minute advice for me?" And reportedly, Mr. K said, "Yes, don't change the recipe of the chicken pot pie." Now, I have known Bob for quite a while, and he allegedly passed this information on to our current innkeeper, Mr. Cowden. Don't change the recipe. I will not attest for Bob's veracity. He was quite a storyteller. But one thing I do know is we still have the same chicken pot pie. The recipe has not changed. And for that, I would like to say thank you, Mr. K. And thank you.
I would just like to, there are many people here that have been at the inn for quite a while and knew Frank really well. However, I would like to just mention one, Rudy Maroney, who's been the baker there for 43 years. Rudy, Okay, with that, I will now turn the meeting over to Lee. Ann Bowles.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I don't need the stand. I'll just, well, actually, maybe I will. Hello? At the risk of telling a typical Koppeis story which goes on and on and on and on. I instead decided to write out my script, even though I prefer to speak extemporaneously. But I decided to write it out because it's really hard to sort of reduce 30 years into a short amount of time. I am honored to have the opportunity to say a few words about my father, Francis Frank Koppeis, the innkeeper of the Wayside Inn for 30 years. And I thank Lee Swanson and the Sudbury Historical Society for inviting me to be a part of this lovely tribute to the work and accomplishments of my father in his role as innkeeper. He was all about goodness, kindness, caring, and serving his fellow human beings. He was unpretentious to a fault, but he was also a showman and an astute businessman, and he was also a forward thinker. He loved the yearly 12-mile march to Concord with the rest of the rowdy Minuteman militia on the 19th of April, hosting the Minuteman Ball, cutting cakes with his ceremonial sword. I used to say to him, "Is that dried blood on that sword? That sword might have killed someone," and he just ignored me. But he rarely missed an opportunity to stage or sponsor an event to showcase the history, charm, and significance of the inn. He forged unbreakable ties with businesses, banks, and countless organizations, creating a steady flow of patrons and guests to the inn, always endeavoring to preserve the historic character of the inn. On one occasion, he contacted weatherman Barry Burbank to complain that the inaccuracy of the weather report cost many restaurants thousands of dollars in business. And Burbank was promptly invited to speak at the Mass Restaurant Association meeting to offer explanations in recompense. Reservations for dinner at the inn on weekends needed to be made at least 2 weeks in advance, though of course walk-ins were always welcome. And because of the widespread popularity of the inn, for Thanksgiving, calls were taken at 7 a.m. on September 1st only, and reservations filled in less than 20 minutes, some say 5. If you had a small wedding party, it was the picturesque place to have a wedding. And the Inn Chapel in Gristmill hosted countless weddings and receptions. I was fortunate enough to have my wedding reception in the main dining room at the inn after my father retired, thanks to Mr. Purrington granting us permission. When he changed the Wayside Inn sign to read "Food and Lodging for Man, Woman, and Beast," it was like a shot heard round the world. From Kansas City to as far away as South Africa and England, it made news. I have newspaper clippings from various places in the world that recognized that change. My father made everyone who came to the inn feel important and valued, and everyone who worked there as well. He had a huge and noble heart and a remarkable spirit, and many, many people loved him, especially my family. He loved all of us, and he loved the Wayside Inn. And we all loved the Wayside Inn. Dad was a people person. Children gravitated to him and he to them. He also delighted in listening to the older folk who knew a thing or two, whether it was a member of the boys' school or the architect of the gristmill or Forrest and Kay Bradshaw or Winnie Grinnell. Whoever it was, he was always there to listen. My father's experience with my grandfather's thriving bakery business in St. Louis, his stint in food service while in the Army, and his job as assistant manager and accountant at Hotel 128 provided the foundation for his future at Wayside Inn. And given his fascination with history and reverence for country, he served in World War II, and given his fascination with history and reverence, it was natural that he fell in love with the inn at first sight. Longfellow wrote in his journal in October of 1862, take my glasses off. In 1862, "October ends with a delicious Indian summer day. Drove with Fields to the old Red Horse Tavern in Sudbury, alas, no longer an inn. A lovely valley, the winding road shaded by grand old oaks before the house. A rambling, tumble-down old building, 200 years old, and till now in the family of the Howes, who have kept an inn for 175 years. In the old time, it was a house of call for all travelers from Boston westward. It was after the publication of Longfellow's Tales of a Wayside Inn in 1863 that many began to advocate for the inn to be preserved as an historic site. Indeed, in modern times, thanks to the foresight of the citizens of Sudbury, who understood and appreciated the historical significance of the inn to Sudbury, to Massachusetts, and to the whole country, the inn was rebuilt and restored after the terrible devastation of the 1955 fire. My father arrived on the scene in 1959, and Longfellow would have been pleased to see how the inn continues to thrive today. When my father became the innkeeper, the new tales of the Wayside Inn began with all of its new characters in place, all doing their share to continue the tradition of hospitality at the old Red Horse Tavern. Hostesses, waitresses, waiters, busboys, functions manager, front desk and front door receptionists, tour guides, cooks, bartenders, bookkeepers, gift shop staff, archivist, baker, coatroom clerk, groundskeepers, gardeners, night watchmen, housekeepers, laundry worker, miller, chapel sexton, ladies' committee, minute and militia, fife and drum. But it was also the list of regulars at the end, the patrons who returned time after time for the Wayside Inn experience that marked how special a place the inn was during my father's tenure. He hosted the freighters, the Wayside Inn Boys' School, the fire chiefs, the tree wardens, the neighborhood principals, the Longfellow Poetry Society, the Sudbury Business and Professional Women's Club, the Lions, the Kiwis, Raytheon, Digital Equipment Corporation, Jarrell Ash, Fenwall, Hewlett-Packard, Perini Corporation, Polaroid, the Colonial Crafts Fair, historical tours, local college functions, and even a prom or two. And many more, not to mention the many dignitaries who came from around the world to visit or stay at the inn. The inn played host to such figures as Robert Frost, Henry Kissinger, Joan Kennedy, Michael Dukakis, Susan Hampshire, Linda Gray, George Hamilton, and Channel 5 was the setting for a number of shows filmed at the inn. For my father, nothing was impossible. He always seemed to find a way to accommodate guests and their special requests, as I'm sure many of you know. I worked with my father on occasional Sundays in gift shops, summers during college, at the front desk, and also when I had decided to leave teaching. He indulged me by allowing me to hold a Shakespearean feast at the inn. The chef, Bob Stanley, modified the authentic Elizabethan recipes that I provided him, and we had a 7-course meal with entertainment provided by Duncan Inches, who performed his one-man show as William Shakespeare. Musicians from the Koppeis Society provided music in the background, and the miller's wife and I sang. It was a huge success, thanks to my father's willingness to try something new. I have many memories of those times, observing just how many people Dad came into contact with and the way that he interacted with them. When Dr. Lilly, who had saved my mother's life, came in for dinner, my father skipped out to the rose garden that he cherished and cut a rose for him. The rose garden, that in the early days was maintained by the bartender Nick Biscadoris, was a tranquil place where Dad occasionally took a break to read the paper and take in the sounds of nature. When the garden was in full bloom, my father routinely brought home a rose to my mother. In the field adjacent to the garden, João Luís Botelho, a Portuguese immigrant with a great green thumb, maintained a garden of fresh produce that was used at the inn. Tomatoes, lettuce, and cucumbers are what I most remember. And of course, the mill-ground cornmeal and whole wheat were used for the cornmeal bread and the whole wheat rolls at the inn. The fondest memories that I have of the inn with my father were the Christmases that we spent at the inn all the years that my father was the innkeeper. Every Christmas Eve, my mother, brother, and I packed our Christmas clothes and gifts and headed up to the inn for the eggnog Christmas Eve celebration that my father hosted every year for the employees. It was his way of saying thanks for all the work that they had done. The inn was a special place to behold, with all of its exquisite colonial Christmas decoration provided by the Ladies' Committee and the craftsmen. The scent of evergreens and wood burning in the fireplaces permeated the inn. The candles glimmered in the windows, and the firelight cast a warm, romantic glow. Employees dropped in as they left work or came back to the inn to crush a cup of authentic Virginia eggnog. We, along with the extended family members and friends, would spend the night at the inn, and on Christmas Day, the only day of the year that the inn was closed, my father prepared Christmas dinner for my mother and all of our guests, which often included the homeless men who lived across the street in the coach house. Dad cut the turkey and I did the serving, and my brother, unfortunately, had to serve as the night watchman. But it was a day for my mother to be served, and that was important to my father because he did spend many, many hours at the Wayside Inn. He also cooked a turkey for the Temples who lived down the street from the inn, and often the Sudbury police would stop by for coffee and a sandwich provided by my father. Yes, The inn was a very special place for me and my family. My father was devoted to the Wayside Inn and worked tireless hours to make the inn a success and to preserve its historic character. He made the inn a truly living inn, and I hope that the preservation of the inn's history and its traditions will continue to live on for generations to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, that doesn't. At the end was the beginning. This is the letter that all the employees got on November 22nd, 1989. And, oops. A salute to all the Wayside Inn employees from Clara and Francis. At the recent retirement party, recognition was made of all the progress of the inn since the dreary days of 1959 when I came aboard. This was done by the contributions and efforts of all the staff. We started out with a key word, hospitality. You have made it happen. The tributes accorded to me were really what all of you have made happen. You have cared. With 130 plus employees, it is not impossible to credit all efforts, but it would be remiss not to credit the roles of Barbara Deverneau and John O'Brien, assistant innkeepers, in their tireless attention to the inn. Beyond the line of duty, long hours, aggravations, so much taken care of without thought because it needed to be done. And that was the way it was. We do have a miscalculation when we transferred this to when we burned it, I guess. We're missing, apologize for the typos here. So there is Barbara Deverneau, who sadly, after her retirement, when did she retire? 2000? Yeah, she only lasted, what, 6 months? 5 months.
John is here.
Yeah, the real John is here.
Next time you'll have to stand up, John. Don't shrink. I want to read this from Allison and Kurt's book. Thomas Boylston Adams was beginning to wonder just what he had let himself in for as he sat at the desk in his executive offices of the Sheraton Hotel on High Street in Boston that winter morning in 1959. Less than a year before, he had acceded to the request of close friend Walter Whitehill of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and become a trustee of the Wayside Inn. Now it was clear why Whitehill had asked him to join the board. The newly restored inn had reopened the previous June, 3 years after the 1955 fire. Following an initial surge of interest, traffic had fallen off badly, and the overstaffed hostelry was running at a deficit of more than $20,000 a month. Whitehill had picked up the phone and called Adams. He knew the hotel business. Was there anything that could be done? I took a tip from Ernie Hennison, who was a very sharp man, Adams recalled later. He always said that if you're losing money, fire the manager. Another axiom of his was that if you couldn't be a good hotel man without being a good accountant. Consequently, innkeeper William Osborne, who had been hired by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, was asked to leave, and Adams was given the task of finding a replacement. One of his first moves was to telephone Arthur Lee, a Sheraton associate who had recently opened Hotel 128 in Dedham. That phone call was to usher in an era of unprecedented hospitality at the Wayside Inn. Arthur told me he had an accountant that he thought very highly of, said Adams. He came in, and I liked him at once. His name was Francis Koppeis. Chuck? Oh, I'm sorry. He's right. Okay.
Francis was born on November 14, 1916, and grew up in Missouri with his 5 brothers and sisters. A graduate of Western Military Academy, he served as a pilot during World War II and spent over 11 years in the U.S. Air Force. On October 18, 1947, he married Clara DeFalco at Kindley Air Force Base in Bermuda, and Francis quickly became a family man. Francis Jr., or Chuck, was born in January 1949, and Anne was born 12 months later. When he left the Air Force in 1951, Francis entered the food service industry. He had only worked for the Dedham Hotel Corporation for a few months when he was recommended for a position as manager at the newly renovated Wayside Inn.
Yes, I first met the innkeeper in March of '59. When we heard that Bill Osborne was leaving, we were told that this other man was being brought in as the manager. And at that point, none of us could even pronounce his name, and we were all saying, good heavens, I mean, who is this person they're bringing in? I mean, is he Greek or just can't pronounce his name or anything, and he's going to be the manager of the Wayside Inn, an old colonial place? And it was a lot of, well, the way people are, you know, they've lost somebody that they've known for a while, and then they think, oh, well, we're not going to like this person. You know, you don't even give them a chance. You just, and how wrong we were, how wrong we were.
Since he always loved history himself, I mean, I think he fell in love with the place immediately, too. It was a perfect match for him. And I don't think you could find a person who would contribute in the same way as my father has, because he's so unselfish, and so he never thinks of himself. He's always thinking of everybody else.
This man knew it was ingrained in him, and it started to remake the inn as of 1959 and bring back part of the charm that had been lacking for so long, and the sense of hospitality that had been lacking. The inn became vital again for the first time for many, many years.
I think the secret to his success is the fact that he's a very, very humble person. He's very giving of himself. As far as hospitality, you couldn't ask for a more wonderful person. His secret is that he makes the guests and everyone, including employees, feel very comfortable here at the inn. I think he's a very warm person. I've seen him here with some of the young people that have had problems. He's been a father figure to them. I've seen people here, the time I've worked here, that have had personal financial problems. He's helped them. And he's just very understanding.
Like Lee has said, he cares for people. Like he used to hire the older men and things and see that they had a place to live across the street. You know, I've seen 2 or 3 of them come and go. Of course, they have died since, but I mean, he's been good to people like that, you know.
When I first started here, it was like a late Saturday night, and 2 house guests came down for coffee and whatever, and I said, well, geez, you know, everything's closed up. So I went by the innkeeper, and I said, can you imagine those people wanted, you know, coffee, whatever, at this hour? And he said, listen, he said, I'm going to call them up. You were here to serve the people at the inn. And I think I learned a big lesson from that. And I've tried to, you know, keep that in mind for like, well, 14 years.
I think he just is a special person. He cares, and he's sincere, and he tries to, I don't know, just make everybody feel like a family.
As far as the employees, it's a family. It's not just a place to work. He's made everybody feel that we're part of a big, happy family. As far as the clientele, the house guests and the dining room guests, he's always made every person, I think, that walked through the door feel very special, like they really belong.
I remember the first time I celebrated my birthday here when he came down, and he had that great big long sword to cut my little tiny cake with, and he had on a wig, a colonial wig, and I think that was one of the prime things that I remember. That's one of close to the first time I was, the early years when I was here, and I thought that was awfully nice.
He is so in tune to people and in tune to what he has to do as far as getting a happy customer and a customer that would come back to the inn. And he's also in tune to the history of the inn so that it all kind of blends with him.
I think that's why he's going to be remembered and missed the most, because he took the time to come over and pay a little personal visit.
I don't think it was a job to him, actually. I think it was part of him. He made himself part of it, I think, is what you might say. He always seemed to be enjoying what he was doing. I'm sure he had some headaches of things, but we never knew it.
I think he lives and breathes Wayside Inn. Really do.
He's more a friend than a innkeeper or a boss type. He just is a very special person.
As a boss? Oh, sometimes he's tough. Sometimes he's easy. He's a good guy, and if you give him what he wants, he'll be happy.
Because he's easy going mostly. He's not so nicky pick.
I've known him for, oh golly, going on 19 years, and he still doesn't know how to spell broccoli.
He's very sincere. He's honest. And he has the ability to listen.
Eleanor Carboni. Eleanor has been here for many years. She's worked in the gift shop. Dad has teased her unmercifully.
Oh, God. Well, I don't know. One time he told me if I got married, I'd get a free reception in here, and he gives me that thought all the time, which I never did get married. So that reception, I guess, is about out when he leaves. Don't do that.
He's a very nice boss, and I like him a lot.
I know we're all going to miss him. I can't picture the inn without Mr. K.
But Francis, Mr. Koppeis, did I say it right, Frank? He was just a great person to us, and we're going to miss him.
How does one pronounce the innkeeper's name?
My mother would be very upset with me if I told all of the family secrets.
I don't think there were three people that say it the same way.
Koppeis?
Kopenekny, I guess.
Frank, Koppai, Frank, Copes, or Cope.
Cope.
Koppeis.
Koppeis is...
The easiest way to remember how to pronounce the innkeeper's name is to think of apple pies, blueberry pies,
Apple pies, cherry pies, and coke.
Apple pie, peach pie, Cope.
Instead of apple pies, it's Koppeis. And I sort of picked that up pretty easily.
The last part of the name rhymes with pie. Koppai. Hi, Frank, Koppai.
Doesn't always work when you tell people, however.
Frank, you'll have to tell everybody yourself just how it's pronounced.
Mr. K.
Yes, that would have been my choice.
Right. Francis Koppeis was an exceptional man, said Adams. He knew how to prevent profits from going out the back door and had the extraordinary ability to get on with his customers and with his help. The first year or two he was there seemed to be 365 crises a year, and he managed them all. The first major crisis was not long in coming. Ever since the reopening, the inn had been closed on Mondays, and most of the staff worked a 6-day week. When Koppeis announced that he planned to open on Mondays, the entire kitchen staff, with the exception of 2 dishwashers, gave notice. Their last day of work was the Saturday before Mother's Day. It was the usual thing when new management comes in, said Koppeis, that everybody was running scared and all sorts of rumors cropped up. The whole kitchen crew, all the cooks thought they were going to get a bad deal out of it, and they all left. And then the chef came in and told me that he wouldn't be able to hold his head up if all his people walked out, and he stayed. So he left too. And so with 2 chefs borrowed from Hotel 128 doing the cooking and assistant manager Fred Russell peeling potatoes and cleaning shrimp, the new innkeeper spent his busiest day of the year in the kitchen helping out with salads, and the crisis was averted. In order to promote the dining room, Koppeis obtained lists of people who owned Cadillacs, Lincolns, or Packard automobiles and offered 2 dinners for the price of 1, cocktails not included. The rationale was simple. We didn't want to lose staff. The payroll was the same whether we had 50 people, 150, or 200 in the dining room. The only difference was the low pay of the waitresses, who made most of their income on tips. This way, the girls and boys had work and got their tips. Meanwhile, advice and encouragement were coming from other quarters. A nucleus of Sudbury residents we remembered that the inn from the old days became regular guests once again. Herbert Atkinson, who lived in the house on Dutton Road, once owned by Babe Ruth, and ran Sudbury Laboratories, made suggestions on menu items that were popular to other nearby restaurants, and Abel Cutting, then owner of the Sudbury Nurseries, advised turning the old kitchen into a small dining room. Abe said that people wanted to get into the place and use it, said the innkeeper. It shouldn't be a mausoleum. It should be a living thing. There was a fence across the end of the old kitchen, and we took it down. Then Herb came down one day and said, "Frank, the trouble with this damn place is that you're more worried about what's in the draperies over here than getting some food on the table for people to eat." What they were telling me was that they wanted a place they could enjoy. This is an inn. This is a public house of entertainment. With that, we made the old kitchen, which was in use before, into a dining room. We moved the gift shop back from the old bar to where it is now, and used the old bar as a place for people to gather, because there wasn't enough room for everyone to have a drink, either before dinner or in the early evening.
It's the idea of food, drink, and lodging for man, woman, and beast. We found out that nobody else put your horse up. Okay. That's why we're the oldest inn. Nowhere and is that right? Okay. That's why we're the oldest inn. Nowhere, and I checked out Williamsburg, Santa Fe, St. Augustine. Is there a place that will put you up and put your horse up? In fact, none of them have older places. They're reproductions. The Wayside Inn has continued to shelter and feed the great and near great. Television shows and commercials have been filmed on the grounds, and the guest book near the front door bristles with the names of celebrities from the worlds of politics, entertainment, and sports. One name that you will not find there is that of Saudi Arabia's King Saud. This incident is one of the innkeeper's favorite stories. The king was in Boston for an operation and wanted to book the entire place for a couple of weeks to convalesce privately. He said, "We turned him down because the inn is not for one person or one particular company. It made for some newsworthy comment in the papers, 'Wayside Inn turns king away.'" This was the Shakespearean feast that I had. I'm sitting on the lap of William Shakespeare, something I would have liked to have done in the real time. But and Marina, the waitress, is there, and who's the gal on the left? Does anyone remember who that is? In any event, our crew, we had a great time at the feast. It was attended by many, many people. We didn't know how it was going to go over, but we had huge attendance for it. We were sold out every single night. We had 13 feasts one year, and I forget what we did the second year. I think it was 8, maybe 8 the first year, 13 the second year. But it was great fun, and I really respected the fact that my father gave me that opportunity. That was in 1980, by the way.
And at some point, Longfellow came back, but he had to do his own makeup. And there's the young Frank. You want to?
Definitely the young Frank. I mean, I don't remember this occasion at all, but I do know that my father was a ham, and he certainly enjoyed performing, and he enjoyed having performers come to the inn as well. So this man obviously was doing a portrayal of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
And we've had since then Ben Franklin come many times. You may remember him. And then the militia was formed. Here was the troop of horse. And we'll be seeing more of the militia, but...
Yeah, and that was, that was a great thing when the Men at Militia were formed, because it really formed an integral part of the inn's activities.
And the color.
And color, yes. You might recognize some of those guys there.
The man in the middle is wanted in 24 states. And because of the minute militia and the fife and drum, suddenly you had interestingly dressed people walking about, and also were patrons of the inn. The man on the right is a selectman in a small town in the middle of the state. And he hasn't changed at all. He still looks like that, and I won't say his name. We have few pictures of the customers, because one of the things at the inn is that you're encouraged not to take pictures of famous people because they were there as guests and they needed their privacy. That's Joe Poe on the right and the Santa Moros on the left.
Now, I will say one thing about Joe Poe. My father loved Joe Poe. I did too. She came to our wedding, before she died. But there were times when Joe Poe came quite frequently. My father would go running off to the kitchen to hide because he didn't want to have to stand and talk for an hour. And I said, Dad, but it was kind of funny because, of course, Joe loved to talk and so did Dad. So he had to do that in order to keep the business going. Those are the Santa Moros on the left, lovely couple that my parents really liked a lot.
And when they stayed at the inn for many days, or when they visited, there was always a lot of action, a lot of things happening. They made things happen. They were a delightful couple.
Yeah, I'd also like to mention the mysterious Mr. Jones, who used to drive up from Long Island and sign in. And I was working there at the time at the front desk. He was a very thin man, sort of looked like an Ichabod Crane type character. And he'd sign in, and I made up this whole story about his life, and he was up there having an affair, he drove in a fancy car and all this kind of stuff. It was really funny though. Every time he'd come in, he'd always have little sort of strange conversation with me, but it was fun. There were many characters like that.
Mr. K was everywhere.
Oops.
Now here he is.
It's the 4th of
making
July,
the Meeting House Punch, which had secret ingredients. And
it was good.
It was very good and very lethal. And you had just regular cups, luckily, but some people would bring straws.
We had that punch at our wedding. And while my husband and I were having photographs taken and the wedding party was down there, all the guests were drinking the punch out in the rose garden. So by the time they got into the main dining room, I swear we have video of people saying the things that they would never say on a video.
But the thing was that if you were working with Mr. K, like standing here at the table, he would be there. You wouldn't feel him going. He'd suddenly... You look, and he's gone, and he's back suddenly with something that he needed, and he was very quick.
He definitely was. He was always running around. And he always came home with grease on his suits, and my mother would dutifully take them up to the cleaners to get done, these beautiful, expensive suits. And, of course, he'd go into the kitchen and do whatever he had to do. But, it was amazing.
You did what needed to be done at the inn. If he needed somebody on a line cook, you suddenly were put on as a line cook. This is one of the many traditions that Francis started. It's called the Liberty Tree ceremony, and it's done on July 4th. And the little marker behind his leg there, it says the year the tree was planted, which I believe was 1976, right? And that's why it's called the Liberty Tree. Russ Kirby, who is here, perhaps at the end of this program, we're going to be passing around the microphone. But Russ Kirby made up a wonderful poem, I believe it was a poem, describing how many irregular branches were on that tree, because you would... That's the tradition. You took a cup of the Meeting House Punch and you poured it on the tree, and the tree is like, ugh. And so it's a ceremony, a tradition that few people know about. It's on July 4th after the parade, and I think it's still going on. But there's a lot of color and sound. And it is due to Pauline Newtile. I want to thank her for many of these photographs that we would not have been able to do this program without, but sadly she's not on the credits, so Pauline Newtile, thank you. So the tradition is a tree is planted every Arbor Day for somebody. And that says, not Pauline Newtile's tree was watered with the rum. The man who really dug the holes, John Botello, I don't know if I've spelled his name right. Is it?
Not quite, but
not quite.
It's okay.
You want to say his name again?
João Luiz Botello. He liked to have it pronounced properly, and he was happy that I knew how to pronounce it. So he was one of the sweetest men I have ever met. And when my niece was just a little girl and dancing in the little house sitting room when we were having breakfast, he came in and he thought, oh my God, she's so cute. He just hands her $10. That's the kind of a guy he was. She was only 3. Yeah, most people never believe that my father never left the inn, but in actuality, in 1967, my father indulged me once again. I was Daddy's little girl, and I was very close to my father, having worked with him, and I had said in my junior year, I said, Dad, I have to go to England. He said, yeah. I said, well? He said, well, save your money. I said, okay. So I worked at the inn, and I worked at Calvert's in Needham for a while, and I babysat, and I saved up my money, and when it was about time for us to go, or to get ready to go for me to go in my junior year in high school, I said, well, okay, I saved my money. So he thought I was going with a school trip, but actually I was planning to go alone. So because my father would never go back on a promise, he said, okay, well, I guess I have to go with you, because there was no way he was going to let his 17-year-old daughter go alone to England. So we went to England, and that's my father stepping out of 10 Downing Place, you know, the Prime Minister's residence. I thought it was an appropriate photograph. I took that with my little Instamatic camera. And on this trip, my father indulged me yet again in that I wanted to meet Paul McCartney. And so we walked around St. John's Wood area for 2.5 hours or so, and until finally we went into this little market. I'd been asking people along the way, not in my father's hearing, of course, do you happen to know where Paul McCartney lives? And no one really knew. But when we got into this little marketplace, it was on Abbey Road, my father said, these two young ladies have a question they'd like to ask you. And I was really embarrassed, because I didn't know my father knew what I was doing. And so the two ladies says, oh yes, he lives 2 streets down. And so Helen, my friend, and I darted down the street. I almost got run over because I didn't look the right way. And we found 7 Cavendish Avenue, which is where Paul McCartney's townhouse was. And I rang the doorbell, and Paul McCartney came down and met me. And I have his photograph, his autograph, and I almost fainted when he opened the door, and I said, Paul. And my father was standing down the street the whole time. And my father, from that point on, had a tremendous respect for the Beatles, because he thought, this guy did not have to do that. But he came down and met me after I had said into this intercom, after I rang his doorbell, I said, I've come all the way here to England from Needham, Massachusetts in the United States just to meet Paul. And so the person goes, just a minute, and I'm waiting, and I look through the keyhole when I hear this little noise, and I see Paul McCartney walking toward the gate, and I nearly fainted. So my father, that night we went to the Ritz Hotel for dinner, and my friend and I and my dad, we sat, and it was the first time I had a glass of rosé wine. And we jabbered, the word that my father always used, jibber-jabbering away for the whole evening, because I was on cloud 9, having met Paul and having gotten his autograph and taken his picture. We were there for 3 weeks, by the way, and I had a pen pal that I've had for 45 years, and we're still in touch. And my father brought her with us to Scotland and to Ireland. And of course, my husband Jerry is from Tipperary, and it was the first time I had ever been through Tipperary, Ireland. And little did I know that many years later we would be married. Yeah, he was there, and my father never missed a funeral, and they always seemed to be on his day off on Thursday. Unbelievable, but he was really good that way.
You want to speak about the special act?
Oh, you go ahead.
We don't know the year. I know it was in the 70s, but the General Court, and it wasn't just for Francis, I have found out, but he got permission to be able to vote in Sudbury, yet his wife lived in Needham, and he lived with his wife.
And the thing was, too, he just thought it was common sense. People need to vote, and you need to make it convenient for them. And he was at Wayside Inn all of the time, so he needed to be able to just run out and do his vote and come back. Yeah, the Rose Garden, which I mentioned in earlier, that he loved that garden. It was beautiful. It was a very quiet, serene place, and he did take his breaks a lot of times out there when the weather was nice.
And I don't know if we didn't have the door in what used to be the Washington dining room, which is now called the Lemon dining room, for him to mysteriously escape through, to get to the Rose Garden, cut a rose, and if it wasn't perfect, as he held it up to his nose or looked at it, he dropped it. I'd find these roses cut, laying on the ground, because they weren't perfect enough to bring in to a customer.
Yeah, Dad at the front desk. I always loved the old front desk. I was sad to see that was changed, because there was just something about it. It was fun. The only bad thing was that, of course, Dad made us stand for 8 hours when we were working at the desk, and we didn't have a chance to sit down. And if he caught us sitting in the coat room for any amount of time, we got spoken to, because we had to be sure to be there to greet the guests. Oops, took off the guys. Dad's looking a little tired there.
And the sign used to say man and beast. And in 1974, there was a big ceremony, as I remember it, and it was changed to man, woman, and beast. And recently I've noticed the sign has been changed back to man and beast.
Oh.
But maybe my eyesight is bad.
Oh.
No? Okay.
That's awful if it. Wonder who that is over there.
And we'll hear from Hal about this horn, but it is a fire horn, and that the firemen would carry, and I hope it's a replica. You still have it?
I have that horn at home.
Okay.
Yes, it was given to Dad. Dad had a great relationship with all the fire chiefs and policemen, but fire chiefs all over the eastern part of Massachusetts used to come and meet up there, and Al St. Germain just adored him. He was the fire chief when my father was there and when the fire occurred, and would spend a lot of time trying to focus on the safety of people staying at the inn and the inn itself to make sure that it was preserved and a sprinkler system was installed in the inn.
And the stagecoach came back in 1974, and
nice picture.
Let it snow, let it snow. And here we have a story from Bill Hall. His son Chuck still lives here, but it seems that, as a matter of fact, Bill Hall says, we did have a snowstorm encounter. There was a standing rule at the inn regarding a free drink. I don't remember the name of it. It happened to be a kuwu, or the other one.
Stonewall.
Stonewall, but one of those colonial-sounding names. If you showed up during a major storm, which he did, he drove a four-wheel truck to the inn, and he was the only guest in the inn during a snowstorm. He thinks it was 1978, but he wasn't sure.
Probably.
Frank had sent all the help home. Frank cooked his dinner, then he opted out of the drink and had a beer instead. And he often teased Bill Hall about that night. He was a good friend and ran a hell of an operation.
I was among the many things that my father did at the inn. He also plowed the snow with the, he did. And he used to drive home with the pickup truck, and then he would do our driveway and the neighbors' driveways because, he had the plow, so it was great. But my brother used to go out with him because it was a lot of fun to be out in the snow. When we were kids, there was nothing better than to be in a blizzard or being snowed in. And we were on one Christmas Eve really snowed in, and it was fabulous.
And Frank had a long tradition of Christmas cards, and every card that he sent was signed by him. And what I would hear was that Frank would tell me, "Don't tell Pauline that the cards haven't been sent out yet." January or February, he'd finally get around to signing each one and putting a personal note. But that was a secret that Pauline didn't know about, I guess, because Pauline would make all the addresses. And some people answered the card, so who can that be, sitting by the fireplace and tree, reading his barons and waiting with glee for the arrival of jolly old St. Nick and his crew, bringing him what he felt was his due? For it was the night before Christmas, and patiently he waited. His hopes for a big raise all but abated. When there came on the roof a bang and a clatter, he reached for his glasses to see what was the matter. Down through the chimney with a laugh and a roar came a fat man much too big for the door. He cried out, "Hello, Frank, is it Santa you're expecting? That's too bad, because it's the chimney I'm inspecting." Ah, thought Frank, it's Arena and those guys in red. For this I stayed up. I should have stayed in bed. But there's comfort for our host without peer, because he'll be back 13 times next year. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I guess that was from the Arenas.
And that was one of the Christmas cards one year. That is Dad sitting in the chair there.
But people would, take the Christmas card and twist it around. And here was a great ceremony in 1979 where he got the black feather. Right, an incomparable black feather was duly awarded. And I hope somebody will have a story to tell about this. And he is recognition by his peers in the restaurant industry. He did become, what was it, Ann, the president of?
He was at one time the president of the Mass Restaurant Association, and he was a director with the association for many years, and went to many, many of those events and meetings.
So that's Bob Stanley in the back, who was chef for a long while. And consistent good reviews. There were so many reviews in the material I got from Ann that I just picked one. But through the years, that was 1986.
You know, a lot of people used to say that my father looked like Tip O'Neill. I used to take a little bit of an exception to that because my father's nose was not as large as they caricatured him in the Middlesex News.
And wasn't red.
It wasn't red, no.
So he was a member of the Sudbury Business and Professional Women's Club.
Yeah, he was I think he's the only member that was invited to be part of the Women's Club, which is a great honor, I think.
And let's see. We had a lot of pictures of planting of trees.
Yeah, that was Carol Cosard on the right there.
Okay, why didn't it bring up? And the slides, click to exit. Okay.
Regrettably, like many great ideas, it was fine. I thought there would be so many folks visiting here that they would receive enough income from the admission fees to take care of the operation. The result was there was an unhappy deficit, and the trustees at that point were local people, decided that they had to make some kind of change. With this, they asked Hotel 128, from where I was working as assistant manager, to come up and see if they could operate the inn on a one-year contract, 60-day escape clause for either party that wished to withdraw, and see what you can do. Of course, they paid a fee for the service. I was asked to come up, and March 1, '59, I came into the picture of being the innkeeper.
It didn't take long for us to realize when this Mr. Koppeis arrived on the scene that this man was a real innkeeper. And he was someone who really had a feeling for the hospitality, for what the inn had been known for over 200 years. This was, to me, absolutely wonderful because where I had worked here before under a manager, it was a different situation, and this was somebody who wanted to be there to greet people, to make them really feel at home, and this is something he did to perfection.
Here was the epitome of graciousness and hospitality. This man knew it was ingrained in him, and it started to remake the inn as of 1959 and bring back part of the charm that had been lacking for so long, and the sense of hospitality that had been lacking. The inn became vital again for the first time for many, many years.
I had no particular plans of anything except to see if we could make it work. And the first year came by, and my boss thought I had done fine. All I know is that they were happy with the results, which I didn't think were perfect at all, but in fact, not at all good for the first year. The benefits come that we had made a turnaround. That was the important thing.
In his 30-year tenure as innkeeper, Frank Koppeis played host to an amazing array of guests, some famous and some not so famous, all of whom came away with a special feeling for the inn and its host.
Two men were seated in the back of the tap room at what we call the lover's table today. Eddie Bridges came in and said, "Hey, Frank, isn't that Robert Frost?" I says, "I don't know, it looked more like that fellow in Washington, poet down there." And I said, "Oh, no, that's Robert Frost." I said, "Well, I don't know Robert Frost, so you better..." He was right. It was Robert Frost talking to David McCord, because Robert Frost didn't have hearing aids or have the capability of good hearing. David McCord spoke to him loudly so that some of the words popped out. They were discussing what Robert Frost was going to say on Kennedy's inauguration the following January. This was December of 1960. And of course, the inauguration was 1961. He came by one other time, but it happened to be on Mother's Day, and one of my friends saw him out there and saw all these cars. Mr. Frost said, "Oh, I think, no, there are too many. Come on in." He says, "I'm sure Frank will get you in." He says, "No, just tell him we'll come another time." Barbara Devenot has been invaluable, is a very simple understatement. She's a hallmark of a person of hospitality and has made folks feel comfortable, welcome. But it's so good to have people who work with you and make things possible. The feeling of loyalty and devotion to the inn, working with them has made my job a lot easier. I'm amazed that people think I've done so much, but it's simply acceding to what I think folks would like to have. We have chicken pie on a menu. It's in the Ford Times magazine many years ago. The same chicken pie recipe is used in here. We make our corn muffins and wheat rolls. That from the grain we have at the grist mill. We have that grain to sell as well too. The pot roast, Yankee pot roast, having duckling, that's normal. We get Massachusetts turkeys on Thanksgiving Day. We have Wayside country sausage. We take up pork and grind it with our own little formula. Those are the things that folks, we feel, come to an old inn to see. This is the premise of hospitality. We try to provide what you think folks would like to have.
In the 1960s, the Wayside Inn was once again a vital and prospering place. But in November 1965, the inn's patrons and employees experienced a frightening sense of déjà vu.
The fire in 1965 was something that I don't think any of us ever expected anything like this would ever occur again. We felt that after the 55 fire, the inn was reopened, that the protection we had, the fire alarm system, the CO2 system over the range, that there was just no way that we could have another fire here. And when I was awakened early the morning after Thanksgiving in 1965 and told that there was a working fire going at Wayside Inn, I still could not believe it. I figured, well, it was some minor thing, and by the time I got my clothes on and dashed up here, it would be completely out. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and they were preparing breakfast for the house guests. There was a flare-up on the broiler. The CO2 system did not go off. The flames spread through the ductwork and then on up to the ballroom and the attic area overhead.
This fire wasn't quite as hard to extinguish because it did go straight up and out through the roof, so that vented the fire. In '62, I built a new fire station down here on Route 20. But remember, we still didn't have hydrants. The water was a mile away. We had 4 aerial ladders, one on every side of the building, and we were able to contain the fire. It was out at about 8:30.
The actual fire damage was minimal as compared to the 55 fire, but there was a lot of water damage. The main dining room had probably 2 or 3 inches of water on it, which caused a great deal of concern to our brides who were to have a wedding reception there the following day.
We were able to repair the roof that same day because Francis Koppeis had a wedding reception coming up in the inn for the Saturday. And he was afraid he wasn't going to be able to have it. But as luck was, we got one of our called firemen. His father owned a big construction company in Boston, and they came right out with their full equipment, repaired the roof, and Francis was able to hold the reception.
Through the years, the Wayside Inn has sponsored many historical events and reenactments. One such episode was the return of the inn's 1862 stagecoach in the fall of 1974, after being taken to New Hampshire for restoration. Frank reminisces with Kay Bradshaw about the historic trip she made with her late husband, Forrest.
It was all complete sometime in October, early part of October, possibly earlier than that, was being ready. Bill says, "Is it okay if we take stagecoach down by the horses, with horses?" I said, "Good golly, yes. Why not?" He said, "Well, I just wanted to see it." I said, "Wonderful." I hadn't hung up the phone more than a couple of minutes, and I called him back. I said, "Hey, guess what? We're going to have a mail run with that."
And so then Monday morning we started out. And of course I was the liaison with the car following the coach.
You started from Loudon, New Hampshire, where they had picked up the
And
coach.
then we went to Concord, to the Capitol, and then we went down and stopped at the schoolhouse, and we had to take the mail. We had to deliver the mail to the post office each night. And then we had to get up in the morning and go to the post office and pick up all the bags and load them on the coach. One morning we were a little late, and the coach had started. But we caught up with them, and we loaded the coach, and away we went. And then, of course, I had fun. People would ride on the coach for a little ways, and then I'd pick them up and bring them back to their car that they left down at this crossroad somewhere. And then I'd go along. And then one day this car came along, and she drove in between the coach and me. And I thought, well, the nerve of that woman. She doesn't know who I am. And I thought...
They came down roughly a few minutes before 12 o'clock on Saturday morning, this October 1974, to stop here with that mail coach. And on the outside is hanging that contract, Wayside Inn contract with the United States Post Office, provide this mail service from Loudon, New Hampshire to Wayside Inn, Sudbury. And the stagecoach pulled in and stopped in front of the building, and we had a few words from the postmaster, the lieutenant governor who was there, and we're just about finished. I said, "Whoop, wait just a minute. We haven't been paid for this contract yet, sir." Whereon he whipped out a dollar bill and poked it in my fist. "Here, is that taken care of?" We had a lot of fun with that particular thing.
Closely linked to the Wayside Inn in both historic spirit and in the founding enthusiasm of its former innkeeper are the Sudbury companies of Minute and Militia.
And somehow the day was April 20, the day after April 19. John Powers and I were talking somewhere along the way, and he said, "Frank, you know, there were only 2 people from Sudbury over at Concord yesterday." And he says, "Sudbury had more people in that Concord affair than any other town." Of course, that's simple explanation. Sudbury had more people than any other town outside of Boston in 1775. Well, with that, the 2 of us that evening gathered up the selectmen individually. The selectmen agreed with a good idea to do something about it. In any event, the first time we made the trip over there was April 19, 1964. And it was a wonderful, wonderful occasion. I don't know how many of us showed up for that, but Rex Traylor was one of them. He was leader of the horse troop. Al Bonazzoli was named head of the Minuteman Company because he was an American Legion chap from World War I and real ongoing patriot, to say the least. And we elected him, by the way, the first colonel to emulate Colonel Ezekiel Howe, who led 2 companies of the 7 companies of Minute Militia that went to Concord on that eventful day. Al Bonazzoli was a quite modest man, 70 years old or so. He says, "I'm very honored about this, being colonel of the first Minuteman Company to reenact what Zeke Howe did." But he says, "How the heck is the name Bonazzoli going to sound ahead of a Minuteman Company?" With that, it was established we'd have a celebration. So we have the Minuteman Ball, a regimental ball following the return trip from Concord, the first Saturday now. After that is when it occurs. Out of it came the ancient fife and drum corps. After April 19th till the last Saturday in September, they come up each Wednesday evening from around 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock and practice up and down the driveway. They're so good, the fife and drum. They got an invitation to go to Symphony Hall. Arthur Fiedler invited them to come up and play for a 10-minute intermission. And they played perfectly. Fiedler was tickled pink, apparently, because he got a tricon hat, made a member of the Fife and Drum Corps and Minutemen, and come to Sudbury anytime, drink all the beer you want.
Colonial traditions, the poetry of Longfellow, the vision of Henry Ford. The Wayside Inn holds a fascination for all who visit here. But for many, its magic is a more personal one.
Well, the inn, of course, has always been like a second home to me since I've been involved with it since I was about 8 years of age, I guess. Over the years, either just attending schools, coming to dancing classes here. Even when I was in high school, we would come to the inn to dance with the boys from the boys' school. I'm working here.
Well, I first came here, I suppose, as a babe in arms, because my father had been here earlier, before the Lemons even came. And they came the year I was born, 1897. And then, of course, my family brought me here, too, because we'd eaten many a dinner here. And I don't know, it's just part of my growing up, I guess. That's part of my life. Yeah.
The inn has a fascination to me because it has survived, and it has there is so much to be done here, so much to be either to be restored or to be improved, and there's so many challenges here and so many different levels.
When I came out the first time here, I was immersed in feeling of history, of poetry. It just took me over completely. I was enamored. I fell in love with it right on the spot.
This is a different place. This is a place where people can come to get away from the rush of everyday life and to enjoy a quiet country place and to enjoy the hospitality of an old inn.
A region of repose, it seems, a place of slumber and of dreams, remote among the wooded hills, as ancient is this hostelry as any in the land may be, when men lived in a grander way with ampler hospitality.
And as Francis always said, it was the people that worked at the inn that made it successful. Now, who's on the right?
Oh, that's
Joyce? And of course, Marie Sheehan on the left. You can yell out if you know Mary Crossman.
Oh, Mary Crossman. I didn't realize that. Markham.
And they had fun working at the inn. I mean, here they are on the day off or something, but
there's Tommy Bryan.
Tommy Bryan on the left.
Eleanor and
Jackie
Jackie
Lawson. I don't know who's on the left. Bill Hanley.
Bill Hanley
and Stanley.
Anne Stanley and Linda Stanley.
Linda Stanley.
Linda Stanley and Anne Stanley.
Right. Now here he is sitting on Santa's lap, asking for something, with the little elves there in the Ford room. And his final tree in 1989, attended by the tree wardens who always meet at the inn. And then in the 350th parade, he was the Grand Marshal, as you see. And we have only pictures of the one float. And we had the Lord Mayor of Sudbury of England and the Mayor of Sudbury, Canada, stay at the inn. And the Lord Mayor of Sudbury was a real character of Sudbury, England. She went around and knighted people. All you had to do was kneel down and she'd knight you. And that's Corinne Nichols as a Lady of Liberty. And the Freighters have been meeting there since 1904. And the Freighters are Unitarian Universalist ministers, and they still come.
It's Les Longworth.
Les Longworth on the left.
Sketch
and the guy on the right, I don't know who he is, Ron something or other. And then we sprang something on him. When I had told him, asked permission if he would do it, if we did it. And, he said, yeah, but then he forgot about it. So since I had convinced all the employees to raise the money, it was $400 to give him a balloon ride on October 30th, 1989. I had to send 2 armed St. Ange Regiment people in to collect him because he kept saying, I'm not ready, I got too much to do. It was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As you see, it was getting dark, and the balloon is being filled up, and finally it's writing, and then it's ready to load, and he's not around. He's nowhere to be found. And finally we get him there. Joe Poe says goodbye. She was really fearful that he might not come back. And luckily they took a picture from the balloon and showing everyone down below, and another picture and another. And it was about a 15 or maybe a half-hour ride, I guess. And they landed in a cemetery in Framingham.
And I have to tell you that my mother and I, had we known about that, it wouldn't have happened.
Thank heavens they didn't know about it.
It was nice to know about it after the fact,
Right.
I have to say.
And then the small little get-together at the Best Western Royal Plaza Hotel on the 30th of October. 650 people. And this portrait I had done while he was still at the inn, and it was a wonderful cold day, and all the family was around him while he was sitting for this oil painting to be being done, and his grandchildren are playing. It was a great scene. And he came back for Anne's wedding, and that's Anne in the middle, and Jerry is the husband, and who's on the left?
My niece in the back, okay. Stephanie.
And
there's my mom on the day of the wedding.
The woman who you hardly ever saw at the inn, but she was there occasionally, and what I didn't know is that he was still marching way after retiring. Here it was 94, and
Yep, he used to prepare a few days before the event. We'd go walking around Jarvis Circle a few times to get in shape, and he'd go off, and I'd say, "Dad, are you sure you want to do this?" And he said, "No, gotta go, gotta go." You know how he used to say that. Gotta go.
And who's missing is Pauline Newtile. Thank you, Pauline. And thank you, Chuck. The films were from Laura and Jim Lowell's Yesterday News, and they're excerpts. Yeah. Come on.
Now, where is our innkeeper? We need an all-points bulletin out. Francis Koppeis, where are you? If anybody doesn't recognize him on sight. He's probably the best friend the Piping and Drumming has ever had. And he's certainly been the best friend most of the people who have visited this inn have ever experienced as well. Frank is a very, very special person, and if it weren't for Frank Koppeis as innkeeper of the Wayside Inn, there never would have been a resurgence of the Sudbury militia, nor of the ancient pipe and drum company. So we owe him a very
Nobody does it better. Makes me feel sad for the rest. Nobody does it half as good as you. Baby, you're the best.
Now we have the Sudbury. Now we have the Sudbury Remembers part. If you have a memory of Frank, a story you want to capture, please raise your hand. Shirley, please. Speak into it.
When my daughter worked there before I did, and she was at First National working, and Barbara Deveneaux came by and said, "Sally, you want to work at the inn?" So she tried it, and she stayed. And she worked the desk for a long time and found out how much the waitresses made, so then she went to waitressing. And they asked Sally, Barbara asked Sally, why don't you see if your mother wants to work here? So I went down and I had to be interviewed by Francis. And he came into the small room there and looked me up and down and said, sure, hire her. So I was there for 28 years.
Thank you, Shirley. I think I see the Fife Master raise his.
After the Fife and Drum Corps made the performance at Symphony Hall, Francis wanted to invite Arthur Fiedler out to the inn. And Arthur Fiedler usually didn't accept invitations like that. So there were several people standing around, and Frank says, well, we're going to send an invitation, and we know that he's a fire buff. He collects fire hats. So he says, well, we can offer him transportation to the inn on the fire truck. And if he doesn't go for that, then we could take the restored coach and give him a ride out in the coach. And he said if he doesn't want any one of those, and time is of the essence, he says we can get a helicopter to bring him out. And somebody said, well, hey, Frank, you don't have a helicopter. He says, that doesn't make any difference. He says, Dick has one. I know they'd let us use it.
Hi, I'm Ron McInnes, and I'm a past Fife master, too. Only he has more fame. Just a quick story. My wife and I were on door duty one Sunday, and my wife happened to collect old keys. Some of them of very various sizes. It was on a great big ring, and she had them tied to her side. And so Mr. Koppeis was there, and he saw the keys, and he asked her, what are those keys for? And she said, they're the keys to all of the chastity belts for the women in the group. He collapsed on the floor, laughing. His face was red. And he finally, when he could pull himself together, my wife says, no, not really. That's the keys to all their hearts.
Thank you, Ron. Mr. Hal.
Well, I can attest to the fact that Frank had a very special relationship with the fire department here in Sudbury, as well as I'm sure the other departments in the town. There is a picture, for example, of the chiefs who assisted in the fighting of the fire on December 21st, 1955, all invited to the inn for dinner every year, probably on December 21st, to celebrate that specific day. And there were, I think, as many as 11 chiefs involved, 11 towns that responded to help put out the fire in the inn at that time. Frank also established relationships with the fire department personnel and the Firemen's Association. The Firemen's Association was one of the few groups allowed to take over the ballroom at the inn for its Firemen's Ball for many, many years. That group hasn't done that for many years, but it was something we felt pretty special because of Frank's invitation to allow us to do that. To this day, the inn provides all of the firefighters in town, as well as I think perhaps all town employees, a 2-for-1 offer that allows our fire department groups, the shift group of 8 men, to come to the inn with their wives and have a party, or a dinner where everybody gets to meet everybody else's family, and it's definitely a special part of our relationship with the inn that started, I'm sure, with Frank. So it's definitely an important part of local community here.
Thank you, Hal. Stories? Yes.
My name's Marilyn Goodrich, and I've been associated with the inn for a while. Back in 1981, when the militia went to the reenactment down in Yorktown, Virginia, I was invited to go on that particular event, and as a camp follower, I had to, or was asked to, provide some kind of reason why I was there. And many of you know I'm a musician by not by trade, but by enjoyment. And I learned original traditional music from 1774 up through 1783. And my portion for that trip was to entertain with authentic music. And after, that was fun. That was really lots of fun. And when that was over, someone must have told Frank Koppeis about my music, because he called me in and asked if I would entertain at the inn on Sunday evening. So for many, many, many months, starting in January of 1982, Sunday evenings from 6 until 9, I would sit in the main dining room in costume on my stool with my guitar, and I would give the history of the Revolutionary War in dynamic lyrics, and it was fun. It was lots and lots of fun. And then after that, I started a small business called Colonial Samplers, and I designed and made this picture for Frank Koppeis's retirement. It took me 2 years to embroider that, but I'm thrilled to see it here today. And that was Colonial Samplers' desire to give Frank Koppeis on his retirement. But my business, Colonial Samplers, samplers of the wayside, of the chapel, Little Red Schoolhouse, and they're still selling. And he encouraged me, and he was wonderful to Colonial Samplers and me.
Thank you, Marilyn. Shirley has another remark. Another story.
Everybody knew Eleanor Carboni, and she worked in the gift shop and so forth, but I don't think they heard about how she got hired. Jeanette worked the desk on Saturday nights, all alone, nobody in the gift shop. And this went on for a long time, and she was, you know, kind of antsy because she'd run into the gift shop if somebody wanted something. So she said, Eleanor, you come down, sit in the gift shop, and if anybody wants anything, bring your whatever and read a book or whatever. So Eleanor did that, and she'd stay there Saturday night. And one Saturday night, she had someplace else to go. So there was nobody in the gift shop. And Mr. K went by and said, where's that lady in the gift shop? And he said, Mr. K, that's my sister, and you're not paying her. She comes in to help me. Well, put her on the payroll and bring her in.
I called Frank in 1984, yes, 84, and was talking about, he had some legal problems back then. The inn did with the dam at the Hager Dam beside the country store, and in the course of the conversation, I said, you know, Frank, have you ever heard me say to you, and I've said it to you many, many times, I'd like to work at the inn? He said, no. When can you start? And I worked there for 14 years. We have here...
Hi, I'm Dottie Magliozzi, and I worked there 35 years, right? And just to tell you what kind of a wonderful, wonderful man he was. I don't think I can talk. Mary Sliney was the bookkeeper when I got hired. She was a tough woman. And she kept going through assistants, I was told, until I came. And little by little, I got used to her. Well, Mary fell and broke her hip. And she was very quiet about everything in the office, so she never showed me too much. But little by little, Mr. Koppeis was very patient. He says, you can do it. I know you can do it. So I ended up taking over the bookkeeping, more or less. But Mary was still there. And she needed help, and he always gave her help, right? He sent people to drive her back and forth, bring her food, right? And took good care of his help. He was a wonderful.
I warned Ann this might be like an Irish wake, and that's all right. Jackie Bausk.
Joe and I were having our 25th wedding anniversary, and we were renewing our vows in the chapel. And he said, and Frank said to us, well, what else are you doing? And I said, well, what I would really like is to have a reception in the basement of the chapel. So he let us, and we're the only Henry Ford and the Bausks were the only two that ever had a reception in the basement of the chapel. But I have another quick little one. My kids in the summer would go on a bike ride, and they'd come home, and I'd say, where did you go? And they said, we went to Mr. K's. And they would go into the inn. It wasn't the Wayside Inn as far as they were concerned. It was Mr. K's. And they'd go in, and he would bring them in and have them sit down, and he'd sit with them and have a Coke, and he treated them like they were a dignitary, just like any foreign dignitary that came in. The kids were that important to him.
More stories? Memories?
I'm Ellen Given. I'm a musician, and have played at the inn, over 30 years. My trio got their start there. But before that, we've known Mr. K since probably the late 60s. And before, I had both my girls at home, and called Mr. K after she was born. First one was on her due date, July 22nd, and he said, hooray, and then he would always go, we were one of the ones that he would pick the roses for in the garden. When she was 3, he gave her a tour of the kitchen. She called him a rascal, and he loved that, and he always introduced her. This is the little girl that called me a rascal. And once we were there, in the summer, it was in August, and David McCord was there, and he brought us over, and he introduced the girls to David McCord, and David McCord got up from the table and went out to his car and opened his trunk and autographed 2 of his books and gave them to Marnie and Janine Drew Little Bunny. But he was a fantastic humanitarian. And I was just there last night, sitting up in the Hobgoblin room on my break, and it was very almost ethereal, because if you get a quiet moment at the inn, you can really feel the spirit of the people, that not only Mr. Koppeis, but Doug, the bartender, and Barbara. Their spirit is still there.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and now we'll have some refreshments. Thank you.
Hi, Dottie. Good.